The moment Roman soldiers captured a queen, mercy vanished from the earth beneath her feet. The war was over. The swords were lowered, and the banners of victory were raised, but for her, the true nightmare had only just begun. Rome did not take queens as prisoners. It took them as warnings. What followed was not justice, not execution, but a slow, deliberate destruction of dignity meant to echo across generations. The things done to captured queens were so calculated, so publicly cruel, that even Rome's own historians softened their words, leaving behind silence where screams once lived. This is not the Rome of marble statues and noble speeches. This is the Rome built on humiliation, fear, and the breaking of women who dared to rule. Rome conquered the world with iron, but it ruled it with something far more enduring than steel. It ruled through fear carefully shaped into ritual. When a queen fell into Roman hands, the empire did not rush to end her life, because death could still grant dignity. Rome wanted something deeper than obedience. It wanted submission carved into memory. A captured queen was not seen as a human being, nor even as an enemy. She was transformed into a lesson one meant to be read by every eye and remembered by every mind that witnessed her descent. To Rome, a queen represented far more than a battlefield loss. She embodied identity, ancestry, belief, and continuity. She was living proof that power could exist outside Roman control. That alone made her dangerous. Killing her quickly would have risked martyrdom. Letting her live, stripped of power and dignity, turned her into a weapon against her own people. Rome understood psychology with chilling clarity. It knew that fear outlived violence and humiliation outlived death. The first violence inflicted upon a captured queen was not loud. It was deliberate and methodical. Royal garments were removed piece by piece, not out of necessity, but symbolism. Jewels were taken not as loot, but as erasure. Every object that connected her to authority was stripped away until nothing remained but flesh and vulnerability. Hair once styled to signify status was left tangled, dirty, or forcibly cut. Skin once protected by tradition and reverence was exposed to the elements, to blows, and to staring eyes that no longer showed respect. Iron chains replaced crowns. These were not fastened hastily. Each link was secured slowly, allowing the weight to settle into her wrists and ankles. The chains were not simply restraints, they were declarations. Rome wanted the queen to feel the transformation, to understand that she no longer existed as a ruler, or even as a person of worth. Soldiers were instructed not to bow, not to look away, not to acknowledge her former status. Mockery was encouraged. Laughter was permitted. Respect was forbidden. This was not disorder. This was discipline. Once bound, the queen was marched through conquered lands. This procession was as important as any battle. The path was chosen carefully through marketplaces, past ruined homes, before crowds forced to witness what resistance earned. Her people were made to watch as the woman they once revered was dragged forward in chains. Some lowered their heads in shame. Others stared in terror. None were allowed to intervene. Rome ensured that the lesson was unmistakable. This is the fate of those who defy the empire. Each step she took erased more than her authority. It erased hope. Rome understood that humiliation inflicted in public wounded far deeper than execution in private. A dead queen could inspire revenge. A broken queen inspired silence. Mothers would remember her image when teaching their children obedience. Elders would recall her chains when warning against rebellion. Rome did not need to be present anymore. The memory did the work for them. For those queens who survived long enough, the final insult awaited in Rome itself. The triumph was the empire's most sacred celebration, a victory parade meant to glorify generals and reassure citizens that Rome remained unstoppable. Music echoed through stone streets. Flowers fell from balconies. Wine flowed freely. Laughter filled the air. And behind the golden chariot walked the queen. She was not announced as royalty. She was not named, she was displayed. Her stolen treasures were paraded before her, proof that Rome had taken not only her land, but her legacy. Banners bearing her symbols were torn, trampled, or mocked. Sometimes effigies of her gods were carried, broken, and ridiculed to show that even divine protection had failed. The crowd cheered not in hatred but in delight. Humiliation had become entertainment. Rome did not hide its cruelty. It choreographed it. The queen was forced to walk slowly, allowing every citizen to see her face, her chains, her defeat. Children pointed. Soldiers laughed. Senators watched with approval. This was Rome at its most honest. The empire believed that power was proven not by mercy, but by domination made visible. When the parade ended, the crowd dispersed, satisfied. The queen did not return to daylight. She vanished into corridors beneath the city, into underground cells where time dissolved and silence pressed in like a weight. There were no announcements, no formal sentences, no records meant for preservation. Food was rationed unpredictably. Isolation was enforced. Names were no longer spoken. Rome understood that a queen forgotten by the world but alive in misery served the empire better than a public execution ever could. Some queens died slowly in captivity. Others were executed quietly once their symbolic value faded. The details were rarely recorded. Rome did not document shame. Silence became part of the punishment, erasing responsibility while preserving fear. A few queens understood this fate well enough to refuse it. Cleopatra was one of them. She knew Roman customs. She knew the triumphs. She understood that capture meant becoming a spectacle paraded, mocked, stripped of dignity before a cheering crowd. Roman soldiers were already preparing to display her as proof that even divinity bowed to Rome. Her death was not romance. It was defiance. Rome could take her kingdom, but it would not take her body and drag it through its streets in chains. In distant provinces, Rome refined its methods even further. The treatment of Boudica revealed the empire's most calculated cruelty. Long before full rebellion erupted, Rome attacked her authority through public punishment and violence against her family. This was not random brutality. It was strategy. Rome believed a queen's power lived in her body and lineage, motherhood, presence. By violating all three, the empire believed it could extinguish resistance before it spread. Queens suffered more than kings because they represented a deeper threat. A ruling woman challenged Roman ideas of order, dominance, and control. Kings were enemies. Queens were contradictions. Execution was too clean for them. Humiliation was instructional. Rome wanted ruling women erased so completely that no one would dare follow their example. Many captured queens vanished from history, not because nothing happened to them, but because Rome chose not to remember what it did. Names faded. Deaths went unrecorded. Silence became the final weapon. Yet fear endured. Rome ruled not only through conquest, but through carefully constructed horror. And nowhere was that horror more visible than in what Roman soldiers did to captured queens. The terror Rome crafted did not end with one queen, or one parade, or one province. It became a language spoken without words, a warning that crossed borders faster than legions ever could. Long before Roman soldiers arrived at a city's gates, stories arrived first. Stories of queens dragged through streets. Stories of chains cutting into skin once kissed by crowns. Stories of women who ruled and then vanished, leaving behind only silence and fear thick enough to choke resistance before it could breathe. Rome understood something few empires ever admitted aloud. Power was not maintained by victory alone. Victory faded, fear endured, and fear, once planted deeply enough, no longer required constant violence to survive. It lived inside the imagination. It grew teeth there. Captured queens were the perfect vessels for this fear. They were visible, they were symbolic, and they were vulnerable in a way kings were not. A king defeated could still be respected. A queen defeated could be reshaped into something grotesque, something meant to disgust as much as terrify. Rome did not merely want obedience. It wanted submission soaked in shame. The soldiers who handled captured queens were not improvising. They followed traditions hardened by decades of conquest. Every insult, every deprivation, every public display had precedent. Rome perfected the art of slow annihilation, where the body remained alive but the self was systematically dismantled. Days blurred together in captivity. The queen was denied mirrors, denied news, denied any confirmation that her people still remembered her. Isolation became its own form of violence, a quiet pressure that pressed inward until identity itself began to fracture. In these underground spaces, time lost structure. Light arrived rarely, if at all. Voices echoed down corridors but never stopped long enough to offer comfort. Sometimes guards spoke her name only to mock it. Sometimes they refused to speak it at all. The goal was not pain alone, but disorientation. Rome wanted the queen to forget who she had been before Rome decided who she was now. Even when execution loomed, it was not granted with dignity. There were no final speeches, no ceremonial acknowledgement of rank. Death, when it arrived like neglect, quiet, unremarkable, stripped of meaning. Many queens died without witnesses. Others died with only their captors watching, ensuring no legend could grow from the moment. Rome did not fear killing queens. It feared remembering them, and yet memory resisted. Despite Rome's efforts, whispers survived. In villages and distant lands, mothers spoke of queens who had walked in chains so their children would never challenge Rome. Elders told stories not as inspirati. Even those queens who avoided capture lived under this shadow. They knew what awaited them if they failed. They knew the price of survival was often death by one's own hand, rather than life under Roman control. This knowledge shaped decisions on battlefields and in palaces. Rome's cruelty reached backward in time, influencing choices before defeat ever occurred. The empire understood something else as well. History could be edited. Roman writers praised victories, celebrated generals, and immortalized conquest in marble and stone. But the suffering of captured queens rarely appeared in full. It surfaced only in fragments, softened language, and euphemisms. Rome did not lie outright. It simply chose what to remember. This selective memory created the illusion of civilization. Rome could call itself lawful because it buried its brutality beneath ceremony and silence. The chains were hidden once their purpose was served. The queens disappeared, and with them, the evidence of how fear was manufactured. Yet the absence itself became a clue. Why did so many powerful women vanish without record? Why were their endings vague, incomplete, unresolved? Because resolution would have required honesty, and honesty would have exposed the empire's true foundation. Rome was not built only by roads and laws. It was built by spectacle, by humiliation ritualized into governance, by the understanding that terror, once normalized, no longer needed explanation. The fate of captured queens was not an exception to Roman rule. It was the rule distilled to its purest form. Even centuries later, the echoes remain. When history remembers Rome as orderly, advanced, enlightened, it does so because Rome succeeded in controlling the narrative. The screams were not written down. The chains were melted. The cells collapsed into ruins. But the absence lingers like a bruise beneath the surface of history. And if one listens closely, the silence speaks. It speaks of queens who walked into darkness while crowds cheered, of women who ruled, were captured, and were reduced to lessons, of an empire that called itself eternal while erasing those it feared most. Rome did not just conquer queens. It turned them into warnings. And those warnings outlived the empire itself.